The topic of today's webinar is municipal measures to reduce impaired driving, and we have two guests with us today from MAD Canada. To introduce our two presenters for today's session, Eric Dumschat is the legal director of MAD Canada. Eric develops and drafts MAD Canada's policy documents and regularly speaks with politicians of all levels of government, police services, and the media and the public to champion the adoption of legislative and policy reforms. Eric is a member of the International Council on Alcohol, Drugs, and Traffic Safety and has presented at national and international conferences. Eric has an honors BA in political science from the University of Waterloo and is a Master's of Arts and JD from the University of Western Ontario. Eric was called to the Ontario Bar in 2017. We also have Steve Sullivan, who is the Chief Executive Officer of MAD Canada. He was previously MAD Canada's Director of Victim Services. With 25 years of experience advocating on behalf of victims and survivors of crime, Steve is a recognized leader in influencing policy and direction in the areas of Canada's victims' rights and criminal justice reform. Steve has worked regularly with law enforcement, prosecutors, corrections, and parole officials and elected officials. He has also developed and delivered educational programs on victims in the law. Steve has an honors BA in law with a concentration in criminology from Carleton University. So before I turn it over to Eric and Steve, just a quick overview of the presentation objectives today. We're hoping by the end of the session, participants will be able to describe the costs and harms of impaired driving in Canada, explain the areas of authority that federal, provincial, territorial, and municipal governments have in relation to impaired driving countermeasures, describe the tools that local governments can use to reduce impaired driving, reduce recidivism among offenders, and better support victims, and identify opportunities for government reforms to reduce impaired driving and support victims and survivors. And now I'm going to hand it over to Steve.
Thank you so much, Amanda. Before I start, I'll just say that I'm coming to you from Ottawa, which is the unceded territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation. So I'm going to do a few introductory slides that just tell you a little bit about MAD Canada, sort of the state of the problem of impaired driving in Canada. But we're going to leave the bulk of the presentation to the actual recommendations. So Eric will do most of those. We can go to the next slide, Amanda. So our mission is quite straightforward: to stop impaired driving and to support victims of this violent crime. We are the only anti-impaired driving organization in the country that provides direct services to victims and survivors of crime. And here you see some photos of individuals who've been impacted or been killed by those who've chosen to drive impaired. We can go to the next slide, please. Just a real quick overview of our history. Obviously, MAD started in the United States in 1980. We were actually just down there last month to celebrate their 45th anniversary. In Canada, there were a number of small organizations, grassroots organizations like PAID, People Against Impaired Driving, CAID, Canadians Against Impaired Driving. They all eventually came together in the late 80s. And then formally MAD Canada was incorporated in 1990, and we are a national charitable organization. In Canada, we have a relatively small staff, but we have about 1,000 volunteers and about 100 chapters across the country in communities in every part of every region of the country. We rely quite heavily on our volunteers to help with our mission. Next slide, please. So impaired driving, although there has been progress in the battle against impaired driving, certainly if you look at the 80s and 90s and the 2000s, we've seen reductions, but it still remains a major criminal cause of death and injury in Canada. Every year, there are hundreds of people who are killed because of impaired driving, and that's both alcohol and drug impaired driving. And there were thousands more who were injured every year. Some of the folks that we work with suffer life-altering injuries, and has a real impact on their family. Their recovery is never completely over, but we benefit from many of those with lived experience who come to us for support, but then become our advocates and our volunteers. We're very appreciative of their strength and courage. There has been some, as I said, progress in lowering the alcohol impaired driving crashes. But we've sort of seen that progress slow. over the last decade or so. But we've also seen an increase in drugs in, for example, fatally injured drivers has been increasing. A little harder to declare that those are all those drivers weren't impaired, but the trend is quite concerning. Just the presence of drugs increasing. We've been seeing that for many years, even prior to legalization of cannabis. We do see in some jurisdictions that charges are up. In other jurisdictions you might see it down, but it's not always an indication of the actual rate of impaired driving. It's how proactive or active police are, and police have better tools today than ever. They have mandatory alcohol screening, which if they stop anyone lawfully, they can demand they provide a breath sample to determine if that person is impaired by alcohol. And obviously, we have more officers who are trained and they have better training in terms of drug impaired driving. So all of those things you would expect, an active police service is going to find more people who are driving impaired. It's our position that impaired driving is not an accident. It is a decision that someone makes to get behind the wheel. And sadly, in many cases, it's other people who end up paying the price for those decisions. Next slide, please. Young people are very heavily affected. The highest risk category for people who drive impaired is young men, but also in terms of fatalities and injuries, we see an overrepresentation of young people. It's a factor in half of crashes involving 50 to 24-year-olds. Deaths involving drugs, the presence of drugs is now exceeding alcohol. So those are, again, concerning trends, and a lot of work remains to be done there in terms of educating youth, which is something that we do, but also just in terms of people's understanding about the risks of drugs and driving as well. Next slide, please. So a real quick snapshot, and this is 2021 data. Canada does a lot of things incredibly well, and one of the things we don't do so well is data. So this is a little outdated, but about 80,000, almost 80,000 total charges and short-term suspensions were laid in total in 2021. That's 206 charges and suspensions for every 100,000 Canadians, and that's an average of 215 charges, suspensions laid every single day. And we know that there's at least one person who on average, who dies every day from an impaired driving-related crash or alcohol drug-related crash. So the problem is still quite persistent. It's still very much a public safety issue. Next slide, please. So in the first slide, you would have seen that we sort of have 5 categories that we work on. Victim services is really important. It's one of our main elements of our organization. Public awareness and youth education, but our public policy, which we'll focus on today, is one of our main pillars. And we work with all levels of government. As you'll see, we're going to focus on municipal governments here today. And we try to examine as best we can what the evidence is from other jurisdictions around the world and in jurisdictions across Canada to see what works and provide evidence-based solutions to all levels of government. We try to identify the best practices that whatever the level of government is, that's going to make the most sense to reduce impaired driving in Canada. And sometimes the evidence leads you where maybe your common sense might not. And we're always talking to government officials, law enforcement is one of our main partners because obviously they have an incredible role in taking impaired drivers off the road, but also in trying to deter people from driving in the first place. Other stakeholders like other road safety organizations. And so we share research, we share ideas, we promote policies together and laws and measures that we hope will reduce impaired driving deaths and injuries. Next slide. And so this is just, as I mentioned, we try to focus on all 3 levels of government. So in the past number of years, we have provided or developed recommendations for every level of government. So you'll see the top 10 for the federal government. That's about to be updated. So it should be updated on our website soon, but it deals with issues like criminal code amendments, mandatory alcohol screening, technology in cars. Our provincial and territorial document actually has broad recommendations, but then focuses on each provincial government, each provincial and territorial government specifically say what we believe they need to do. And our most recent document is our municipal document. I'll just say briefly, always hard to develop a series of recommendations for municipalities because they're also different, size wise, population wise. So we're very aware that some of our recommendations aren't going to be equally applied in every jurisdiction. For example, public transportation is going to look different in a major city than a rural area. So we tried to craft our recommendations to reflect that reality. But I think I'll turn it over to Eric now, and he can get into the specific recommendations themselves.
Thank you. Next slide, please. Perfect. Thank you. So I'm coming to you from Toronto, which is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. So first two recommendations both deal with mandatory alcohol screening, ensuring that every police cruiser has 2 approved screening devices, as well as make sure that they have the funding to proactively enforce road safety, including the use of mandatory alcohol screening or MAS, or MAS if you prefer, at every lawful traffic stop, as well as running regular sobriety checkpoints. So Steve has already alluded to MAS is the most important measure in Bill C-46, and what it does, it authorizes the police to demand a roadside breath test from any driver that they've lawfully stopped if they have an approved screening device on hand. To do it, you need an approved screening device. In a previous report, we spoke to police to do a enforcement level review of Bill C-46, and one of the issues flagged was they didn't have enough of these devices. There's also been Supreme Court jurisprudence since that says if you want to use one of these devices in an impaired driving investigation, whether it's through MAS or reasonable suspicion, you need to have it on you. Whereas before, police may just drive it out from the station to wherever it was needed. So why do we need MAS? Well, research has shown that experienced police officers fail to detect the majority of drinking drivers, even at sobriety checkpoints. There's one study that found that they missed 90% of drivers at 0.05, but less than 0.08. So between most provincial limits, except for Saskatchewan, which is 0.04, and Quebec doesn't have a provincial limit. And then the criminal level, and then they miss 60% of drivers in excess of the criminal level. So not super great for deterrent if you're missing the majority of people. Decades of research in numerous countries have established that, well-publicized, comprehensive MAS programs have resulted in sustained and significant reductions in alcohol-related crash deaths and injuries. Through deterrence, it's not just about catching these people, it's making impaired drivers feel like if they do drive impaired, if they do get behind the wheel of the car, they will be caught. No more of this breathalyzer roulette. If you are pulled over, you will be breath tested and you will be apprehended. And so to sort of achieve that, you need to have at least 1/3 of licensed drivers tested annually. So we want MAS to be used at every lawful traffic stop. So we need police to have the devices that they need, and we need them to have the funding to do proactive road safety, including MAS, including regular sobriety checkpoints. Because again, when we spoke to police as part of our national scan, many of them said, we're not able to do proactive policing because we've got staffing issues, we've got resource issues. Our guys and gals and non-binary pals are driving from one call to the next. Basically, everyone's hair's on fire. We don't have time to just sort of do road safety. And so that's kind of a problem when proactive road safety and sobriety checkpoints are very important to ensuring that people are deterred from these activities. Next slide, please. Okay, so We want municipalities to advocate for an immediate roadside prohibition program. For those of you not familiar with one of these, currently there are 5 jurisdictions in Canada that have them. British Columbia was the original, then Manitoba, Alberta, New Brunswick just put one in at the start of the year, or it came into effect. And Yukon technically has one, but it's not currently in effect because they redid their whole Highway Traffic Act. So they need to get the regulations in place. So under these regimes, police may proceed purely administratively for drivers who fit within a select category of impaired drivers. So first time, no death, no bodily harm, uh, basically diverts them from the criminal process and puts them through this purely administrative side of things. And why do we want this to be advocated for? Well, one, municipalities don't have the authority, the legislative or constitutional authority to implement one of these programs, so they need to ask the province territory that they exist within to do it for them. But it will save them quite a bit of time. We talked about how policing is right now is running from one call to the next. An IRP will help with that. It's far less labor intensive to do a criminal investigation. Somewhat interestingly, seems to be about 4 hours, regardless of where you are in the country. An IRP takes about 25 to 30 minutes. These times increase if you're using mandatory alcohol screening versus the old reasonable suspicion standard. But 30 minutes, that's quite a lot faster than 4 hours. And that's just up front. Police have other parts. There's disclosure obligations. They may have to testify in court. So just up front, you're having police complete these things a lot quicker, which means they're able to get back out on the road, responding to calls, proactively enforcing. British Columbia, they implemented it as part of a larger traffic safety reform, but so it's not, you can't really say, well, aha, the IRP is responsible for this amount of the reduction, while the other aspects were responsible for the other, but they saw a 50% reduction in their alcohol-related fatalities in the 10 years following the implementation of their IRP. It's more efficient. There's no court time, there's no prosecutors. Like I said, there's less police resources necessary, which we know budgets are tight everywhere. So being able to do more with less or the same is a win in all of our eyes. And we have spoken to police in jurisdictions such as Manitoba that have an IRP, and the Winnipeg police doubled the number of impaired drivers they were taking off the road. Their criminal charges stayed relatively similar, but they were doing about the same amount in IRPs as well. And an IRP is customized by the province to address the specific needs and address the underlying behavior of impaired driving. So it has license suspensions, vehicle impoundments, mandatory interlocks sometimes. Each of these programs is a bit different from each of the other ones, but just a really good process from our opinions. Next slide, please. So implement a comprehensive Vision Zero strategy. We recognize a safe system approach that Vision Zero is sort of really in favor of. Humans are the weakest part in a traffic safety system, and thus the system itself needs to be designed to prevent injuries and fatalities. We want municipalities to ensure that there are multiple ways to get home safely, whether there's transit, vehicle for hire, to incentivize designated drivers, etc. Like Steve said, what works for Toronto is not necessarily going to work for example, Cornwall, Ontario, which is a smaller jurisdiction. So we allow for some flexibilities in our recommendations. Next slide, please. Municipalities should ensure that they've got a municipal alcohol policy that is reviewed regularly, and considering the adoption of a municipal cannabis policy, but we also caution that, Recreational cannabis still relatively new. The public consumption of it is still in its infancy. So just to be very careful along this side, it's something that we've been asked to weigh in on more and more in recent years. Should this be allowed at music festivals? Our idea is, you should have to choose. We know a little bit of cannabis and a little bit of alcohol work together to make a much stronger impairing effect. It's already difficult for people to detect alcohol impairment. It's hard to detect cannabis impairment, so choosing one or the other. Next slide. Establish or participate in a mandatory last drink. These programs deter over-service and reduce alcohol-related incidents, including impaired driving, by focusing on enforcement at non-compliant establishments. So what this does is when a police officer pulls someone over, they blow, they test, their suspected impaired driver. They ask them, where did you consume the alcohol? Sometimes it'll be, I was at home, I was at a friend's house, etc. But if they mention a licensed establishment, they will forward that information to the licensing officials to investigate that and to make sure that people aren't just, running up their profits by serving people to and beyond the point of intoxication. Establish a fatal review committee. For those who aren't familiar, these are the systematically examined source of data from sort of all aspects, multidisciplinary, to identify the factors that contributed to the crash and then to provide recommendations for improvement and, identify other areas that may be susceptible to the same circumstances and proactively fix those as well. Next slide, please. To work with stakeholders to develop and implement anti-impaired driving awareness campaigns. I mentioned previously the need for well-publicized mass campaigns. This is part of one of them. The Call 911 campaigns are, I've heard from police, they very much like it, especially if the person is able to give the driver's license, because they can send a unit to wait at that person's house. So if that person is actually driving home, they can cut them off rather than have to go chase them around town. And our final recommendation is to adopt a memorial road sign program on municipal roads. Next slide. And with that, I turn it back to Steve.
Yes, this is just an example of one of our big campaigns throughout the year is our campaign 911. So we encourage all people, if they suspect that they've seen an impaired driver, to safely call 911. It is a potential crime in progress, and it might be a life saved. We've heard, as Eric said, from police that it's really actually effective. A lot of their calls the calls they respond to are impaired drivers. And we see every year, the numbers go up, and 45 to 85%, 80% increase in calls, which is really, in the first year of the program, really, really positive. Next slide, please. This is just an example of our most recent public service announcement. So we're always trying to find different ways to reach individuals. And we know that young men are among the highest risk categories. So instead of, a lot of our campaigns are pretty hard hitting and can be quite emotional. We wanted to try something a little bit different. So we tried to focus on a positive message for young men, that they can make the right choice. If we played this, you'd hear sort of a Superman song going with it. And it just shows young men making different choices, like handing over their keys, getting into a cab, taking a bus, those kinds of things. So again, just trying to appeal to in a different way to young men. Next slide, please. This, I think, will be our last slide. So this is, as Eric mentioned, our final recommendation is regard to roadside memorial signs. So in 2007, we signed an agreement with the province of Ontario that we could put a road sign on a provincial highway where an individual was killed by an impaired driver. So the middle sign you'll see there is DJ Hancock. DJ was killed in Sudbury, Ontario. That's on a highway there where he was killed. He was coming back from a hockey tournament or a hockey game, and sadly his parents were in a car or two behind him and came upon the crash, and DJ was never, but died before he was able to be removed from the car, and his dad was there with him. We have since signed agreements with several provinces. We still have a few other to go. We just signed with British Columbia about a month ago, so we're working on the first sign there. But in several jurisdictions in Ontario, we have worked with municipalities to put up signs as well on municipal roadways, where obviously a lot of people are impacted by impaired driving. It's more challenging because you're dealing with all these different municipalities, but the first sign you'll see there for Ashley Vinecourt, that was in the Niagara region. And so we've done that with a couple of families, and I just see the question there. It's always at a family's request, number one. So they have to want the sign. They have to approve the sign, all of those things. Absolutely. We would never put up a sign without anybody's permission and expressed interest in doing that. We pay for the sign. Obviously, the municipality installs it. But they're just one more way of honoring those who've been lost to impaired drivers, but also as a good reminder, I think, for people that, impaired driving is still alive and well and has a tremendous impact on individuals. So it's part of our victim services, but also a part of our public awareness.